Okay, so lecture 3 is basically going to tie up some loose ends from lecture 2 first, and then it's going to introduce lecture 4, which gets us into our first body system, the integumentary system. So I'm going to start off with talking about tissues, tying up some loose ends from lecture 2. Now we talked about the levels of organization of the body. Tissues are what make up organs, and organs are what make up our organ systems. As we go through each body system and each organ within those body systems, it's important we know their structure. And the structure of the tissues helps us determine the function of those tissues and therefore the function of the organs and the organ systems. So, we're going to take a look at 4 different types of tissues, their function, their structure, and their location, so that as we get to each body system throughout the year, we're familiar with these structural pieces and what they do. Again, remember, structure always matches function. For example, this pen I'm holding is round, so I can hold it easily. It wouldn't be spiky because then the structure wouldn't really support its function. So please just copy down these notes exactly as I do. I'm starting by writing just Unit 1. Lecture 3 at the top. Okay, and then we're going to continue on with the same format as our notes from class. So I'm going to use the heading VI. This is the Roman numeral we are on. Title it Tissues. 4 major types, and in parentheses, function and locations. Okay, so that's what our heading should look like. I'm going to start off with epithelial tissue. So I'm going to write a little number 1 over here. Label this epithelial and underline it. And I'm going to start off with talking about the location. So I'm just going to write LOC. The location of epithelial tissue is that it's pretty widespread throughout the body. It covers organs, so therefore that explains why it is so widespread throughout the body. And by covers organs, that usually means it either lines them on the inside or lines them on the outside. So we'll also add forms the inner lining of organs. And it also forms the inner lining of those body cavities that we learned about, like the abdominal cavity. So it kind of surrounds those, protecting the spread of infection. Okay, so that is the location of epithelial cells. Next, over to the right, I'm going to start a little kind of like category where I'm going to write basically types or examples of each of these types of tissues. So our epithelial tissue has many different types. For example, I'm going to write the letter A. We have alveoli in the lungs, which are covered in epithelial, or made of, I should say, epithelial tissue. So you might have heard about alveoli in biology class. These are basically what perform gas exchange. So oxygen is coming into your blood, into your blood through the alveoli in the lungs, and leaving to be breathed out of your lungs is carbon dioxide. I'm kind of passing through here as well. So these walls have to be really thin to allow for diffusion. So we're going to draw these, and they're called squamous cells because they are flat. So they look like this, kind of like little eyeballs. And just out the alveoli in the lungs only have 1 layer of these cells, so very thin, and that makes up those tissues. Next, we're going to give an example of the epithelial tissue design in the skin. So this is quite a bit thicker than the alveoli in the lungs. We still have squamous cells, which means they're flat, eye-like looking again. But as we know, the skin is a protective barrier in our body, and so we're going to have more than 1 layer here. Maybe draw about 3. Next, I'm going to add in the nephron and the kidney. So this is a filtering system, so also going to be only one cell thick so that we can quickly filter any liquids that pass through and allow diffusion to occur easily. So these have a different shape. They're more cuboidal, but one layer thick as well. These little dots that I'm drawing in the middle, those are nuclei to show that each individual square with a dot in it is a cell, and same applies to up here. Remember, cells make up tissues, tissues make up organs, organs make up organ systems. The next one we're going to draw is sweat glands. So these are also cuboidal, however they have more than one layer as well. So we're going to draw these at 2 layers thick. And then we also have a couple places in the body where we're going to see some more elongated cells. Usually these cells have something going on that's a little bit different at each end. For example, I'm going to put letter E is in the small intestine. And here we have these longer cells, more rectangular-like, and at the top of them we have little like tentacle looking like things that are going to help with absorption of nutrients in the small intestine. Before I go into our last one, which is going to be in the trachea, I'm going to go back up and label these few that I forgot to. So I had A was alveoli in the lungs. Remember, these squamous cells and layers is going to be the skin. Next we have these cuboidal one layer of cells, which is the nephron, again a filtering system in the kidney. Then we have letter D, which is sweat glands. We just talked about the small intestine, and now we are on letter F, which is the trachea. So we're going to come to all of these organs of the body at different times in the year, and we can refer back to this sheet right here when we get to them to kind of see how they are structured in terms of their tissue. And the last thing I want to do is I gave you the location, I gave you some types or examples, and now we're going to go back right up here under our location and write the function of epithelial tissues. And their function is to form barriers as we see with the skin and lining of the trachea, which I also forgot to label. They also secrete substances, which means like basically produce and release substances. So they secrete. For example, sweat is secreted in the sweat glands. It comes out of those glands. And they also absorb. Just like we saw here in the small intestine, I talked about how nutrients are absorbed. So those are some functions of epithelial tissues. They have a pretty wide variety of functions, but usually we see them surrounding or covering different organs on the outside or the inside. Next, we have connective tissues. This is our second of 4 types of tissue. In terms of location, there's only really one thing we can say here, and that is they're very widespread. Or connective tissue is very widespread. You often want to think that connective tissue connects things. It doesn't. More so, it makes up parts of your body that are widespread, as it says here, throughout and transport different substances. For example, here are some types. Blood, right? So it's widespread throughout the body. Your blood vessels connect your bloodstream all throughout your body, and therefore we have these little blood cells that make up the tissue of blood. Okay, they don't really have a nuclei, and so they're more of a oval shape with a thumbprint type thing looking inside. So I'm going to draw them like that. That's our first example, A. A second example we're going to look at is bone. Bone is structured kind of oddly, but connective tissue does make up bone. Basically just going to draw a circle like that with a bunch more circles or dots making up circles inside of it, rings. Okay, so that would be connective tissue making up bone, and we also have it in our fat cells. So these are more enlarged looking. Kind of have some space around them. And the function of connective tissue is to serve as framework. The best example of that would be bone. Also to fill space. That would be like the fat cells. To store fat. That would also be the fat cells. And to transport gases. That would be the blood. So red blood cells transport oxygen and carbon dioxide all throughout your body. Okay, so again, don't think connective tissue connect. We more so want to think of it as doing these things, transporting, more widespread in terms of serving as a framework. Okay, the next one, number 3, is muscle tissue. Muscle tissue is probably the most familiar to us. And its location is that it's usually attached to bone. And if not attached to bone, it's usually in hollow organs. For example, the stomach, hollow, I spelled that very wrong. Hollow organs, for example, the stomach has many different layers of muscle tissue to help with all of its types of mechanical digestion and churning all that food to break it down. So some types, or the 3 types of muscle tissue are, A is going to be skeletal muscle. So skeletal muscle basically just looks like a bunch of sticks with lines going through them as such. Oops. Okay, so just like a bunch of sticks with lines going this way, which are showing or marking each individual cell. We don't have cells, or we don't have nuclei in every single one of these cells, so I'm just going to draw them scattered throughout the tissue, and it's a little bit unique in that way. So that would be your skeletal muscle. We call this striated. We see all these striations in there, all those lines, and that's a pretty good identifying factor of skeletal muscle. We also have smooth muscle. These are just really long, flat cells. Each has their own nuclei. And lastly, we have cardiac muscle. Cardiac is another way of saying heart, so that will be found in the heart. So C, cardiac muscle, and this is pretty similar to our skeletal muscle, except it's more branch-like, and each individual cell does have a nuclei. So just kind of draw branches the best you can. And I'll go maybe a... Okay, and there's also some striation, or just basically markings of the cell walls. I'm going to use vertical lines and make sure I add a nuclei into each of those cells so that we can clearly see the difference between skeletal and our cardiac muscle in the heart. So for our muscle tissue, we're going to go back over here and do functions. And basically muscle has the ability to contract, so we're looking at movement as the main function. I'm going to flip my paper over for one more, but before I do that, I'm just going to zoom out so you can see everything I have here. Well, not everything, but most of it. Okay, so on the back side, I'm going to write skeletal or nervous tissue. So this is tissue type number 4. Okay, the location is again widespread all throughout the body. And this is a little bit complex to draw. We are going to draw a neuron. So these are the cells of the nervous tissue. You've probably seen them before. It kind of looks like we have a firework going on near the top. And then the end looks like that. Also, we want to draw a cell nuclei right there. And these are going to be used for sending signals. You can kind of tell by the location how they are set up to do that. And we're going to label this side the dendrites. And the back side is the axon terminal. Oops. So dendrites, axon terminal. We have the myelin sheath in here, which send signals quickly from one end to the next while processing it. And the Schwann cells in there as well, but we'll go more into depth with how those are set up later. So the location is widespread. We also find like a bunch in the brain, the spinal cord, and their function is to sense change in the surroundings and send nerve impulses. Okay, so those are our 4 types of tissue. There is a part 2 to this video that you need to watch for tomorrow. I'm starting to talk about the skin, but I'm going to do that in a separate video, so you can stop here and then either pull out a new sheet of paper, or you can use the bottom if you have a nice good chunk of space to continue on with lecture 3.